ESPN says that Michigan's biggest strength, as well as its biggest weakness, both come on the offensive side of the ball. I'm not 100% sure that I buy that. Nonetheless, we're going to talk about what ESPN says Michigan's biggest strength is, what its biggest weakness is, and the other positions that are contingent that make, or I should say, that make those two contingent. On this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Holt, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. ESPN went through its way too early top 25 teams. Michigan's in the 20s. I disagree with that positioning. They also had an article where they were kind of talking about like who could be those off the radar playoff teams this upcoming season. And Michigan only got mentioned by one person. And it was kind of like negligible. It's like, hey, if they, they played really well at the end of last year, maybe if they play really good this year, then it will be good. It's kind of funny to me. Kind of this reset feels a lot like going from 2020 to 2021 to me in some ways, even except for it's more a little bit more tangible given the end of last season. 2020 didn't have that. But what it said in its way too early group is, hey, the strength of Michigan, it's not the front seven. That's what I'd pick defensively. I'd say, you could make a case for the interior line. You could make a case for the edge rusher. You could make a case for the linebackers. You could make even a case for the safeties, which is, to me, tied with defensive tackle as the strongest group. But no, they say that it is the run game that poses the biggest threat to the college football world out there. And while that would make sense if you just kind of understand Michigan's ethos as well as the players it has, I don't necessarily know that I 100% am behind that. And part of it is because that was not necessarily a big strength last year for Michigan, right? Like it was the entire offense essentially, but it wasn't something that you'd sit there and be like, yeah, man, they just ran the ball at will. In some games they kind of did, right? Like, but when I say kind of did, I kind of mean like they ran, they got bottled up, and then they ran when they needed to. Look at the USC game, for instance. So here's what you had last year. You had Kalel Mullings with 185 carries for 948 yards and 12 touchdowns. And that was in, 12 games? Donovan Edwards, also 12 games, 128 carries, 589 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So you have that. It's not anywhere like, right, because you look back at some of these previous years, you had both Blake and Dono in the thousands. Blake up much higher than even that. That's, even though you had Kalel kind of flirting with it, but not quite there, it kind of feels like 2017 when things just kind of weren't really rattling off yet, right? Like Karan Higdon had a pretty good year. Well, actually, it wasn't Karan. Sorry, who was it? Was it Karan? Someone had like 991 yards. It might have been Karan Higdon. Yeah, it was Karan Higdon, I think, that year. 991 yards, that just getting close, but not quite getting there. Like where it's like, yeah, sometimes they can run the ball. And you really certainly don't want to face a Michigan team that can in any given game. But it wasn't like, oh, man, they're just terrorizing other teams with the run game. Here's what Michigan brings in. It brings in Jordan Marshall, who had 31 carries, over a couple games. Really just the Ohio State game and the Alabama game where he had, I think, 110-ish of those 120. So he had 31 carries for 120 yards. I mean, you look at that and that's like, hey, that's a pretty good game for any running back, really. So you extrapolate that and it looks really good. But even better, obviously, is Justice Haynes, who comes in from Alabama. Looking at last year specifically, he had 79 carries for 448 yards and 7 touchdowns. So that more so, because that's like 3 games worth, and you'd sit there and be like, all right, almost 500 yards in 3 games, as far as like if you were saying 3 games worth for a starting running back. That's, or maybe 4, and then you're still looking at 100 plus yards every game. That is something that you're working with. And you combine the two and you would say, all right, that could be cooking with gas. That absolutely could be a place where things could go really well. But it is highly contingent, obviously. We'll talk about this now more so than in segment 3. it's highly contingent on what the offensive line is able to do, because that was, I think, a big failure as well last year. And I mean, even some of the big runs you saw last year, like the biggest run of the year was Kalel Mulling's run against Ohio State. It wasn't like the offensive line had like a big gaping hole and he ran through it and Ohio State couldn't catch him. No, it was he ran into the back of somebody because there were no holes open. He tried to bounce it out, almost got tackled, and then did bounce it out and made a really heady play. Now, this is where you hope with what you have with Marshall and Haynes is more like that than kind of what you saw over the course of last year for the most part. Because we saw Marshall against Alabama have a lot of those same instances and still have those big runs. Why didn't Marshall play a lot last year? Well, he was injured through much of the year. Plus, he was a true freshman. But finally getting his opportunity, he looked the part, and he's able to take really small openings and make something out of it. Haynes can do that. He's got the speed. He's built like a tank. He's got everything that you kind of want. So I think that would behoove Michigan, even if the offensive line isn't absolutely incredible. But nonetheless, it is going to be contingent on what the offensive line is going to do. Now, that position group is a little bit in flux. We're not really sure what that's going to look like. Is it going to be Evan Link at left tackle, right? Sherrell Moore said he's been working at left and right. I would love to see him at guard and maybe see either Nathan Afobe or Andrew Babalola. But these guys have their eyes on them. I don't. I know a lot of people hate to be like, oh, I'm not about trust the coaches. Listen, you have to trust the coaches to some degree because you just don't see what they see in practices. They see things behind closed doors that we don't. And with Sherrell Moore being a former offensive lineman, a former offensive line coach, offensive coordinator, all of the above, I trust his opinion on what he sees a heck of a lot more than mine or any of yours. So with that in mind, I think that they'll find a way to get the best five. And also, we got some coming out of Pro Day. We got some resounding, votes of confidence from some of the outgoing players like Miles Hinton, who said, listen, I was terrible my sophomore year when I made the same move, right? I was a left tackle all through high school. I was left tackle my freshman year. They moved me over to right and I was awful. And it took me a long time before I was able to get there. And he's like, I've seen enough from Evan Link to know that he's able to do some of these things. So it's not just going to be him, though. It's going to be the interior, of course. I think it's also the ability of the running backs. But I really have a hard time saying this is the strength of the team. But if it is, then I would say, yeah, Michigan should probably go ahead and say you can put yourself in the college football playoff, especially considering we're going to get to the quarterbacks in segment 3 and talk about what they are potentially capable of and how that's going to affect the team. So that, because the run game also will affect the quarterback game, but also so does the wide receiver group, right? And that is what ESPN says is the biggest weakness, and I cannot disagree with that. So we're going to talk about the wide receivers, who Michigan's bringing in, who Michigan already has, and all of that. And we're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. And this week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Cal's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball, not only to make the NCAA tournament, but to knock off back-to-back national champion and Hall of Fame coaches en route to the Sweet 16. They accomplished all of this without leading scorer Boogie Flan for most of the SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounder Adu Thiero so far in the NCAA tournament. Ado Thiero, rather. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Arkansas Razorbacks have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, Pathfinder, and go and find your own adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. All right, wide receiver is what ESPN says is the biggest weakness for Michigan. I don't know how anyone can disagree with that right now. I mean, you could say quarterback just for the unknowns, but bringing in Mikey Keene, bringing in Bryce Underwood kind of changes the game a bit, obviously. But when it comes to the wide receiving core, it's still a little scary. Now, I think Michigan certainly is going to address that in the transfer portal. I think there will be options, and I would not be surprised if what we think we're going to see right now ends up looking a lot different by August 30th, minus a couple here and there. But let's look at the two incoming transfers. One's on campus now, one's coming later. Donovan McCulley, the former Indiana wide quarterback / wide receiver, he led the Hoosiers in 2023, Tom Allen's last year, with 48 catches, 644 yards, and 6 touchdowns. It's pretty good. I mean, we're talking kind of like Cornelius / Roman Wilson type numbers. We're not talking, Jeremiah Smith. Not that, Jeremiah Smith probably actually had about those stats, but we're not talking Marvin Harrison. We're not talking about a 1,000-yard receiver. I don't think Michigan's really going to have that anyway, just kind of based off of what it wants to do, and it's going to try to spread it out a lot more than some other teams might and all of that kind of stuff, and uses its tight ends a lot. Anthony Simpson from Massachusetts, he is not on campus yet, but he had 50, and he was, I think, injured last year and only played in 2 games. But the year before, he led the Minutemen under Steve Casula's offensive coordination and under Don Brown, Dr. Blitz, the head coach at that time. Or still at that. I think no, he's not anymore. 57 catches, 792 yards, 3 touchdowns, a little bit more of that slot guy. That is a far cry. When you look at what Anthony Simpson did in 1 year, it exceeds what Michigan's top receivers did last year. Michigan had 4 receivers in more than 4, but like just looking at the top 4 receivers with more than 2 catches. Samaj Morgan, Frederick Moore, Peyton O'Leary, and Kendrick Bell. And then otherwise you're getting into CJ Charleston with 1, Moran Walker with 2. It just isn't that much of an impressive group beyond them, but it's not even really that impressive a group. No offense to them based off their production last year. Samaj Morgan had what would look really good if it was 1 game, but you wouldn't expect the player to get 27 catches. 27 catches, 139 yards. That's like a 5.5 yards per catch, 1 touchdown. His most impressive catch came late in the game against Texas, but otherwise kind of non-existent in terms of like these nice long routes. I don't really understand why I don't really get what was going on there. Frederick Moore, the one that feels like he could be the breakout of the extant wide receivers, had 11 catches, 128 yards, and a touchdown. A little bit more impressive, especially what you saw from him in a couple games, particularly against Alabama. That feels like, okay, 2 games and 60-ish yards per game. Peyton O'Leary's kind of in a similar boat, 10 catches, 102 and 1. That's like, okay, they could be decent role players, and Kendrick Bell had 7 catches for 70. Now, here's the thing, as we've talked about a lot on this show, you get better at football by playing football. Any number of these guys could actually take a big step forward and actually do something. But when you look at the difference between Donovan McCulley, Anthony Simpson, and then the guys who are already on campus, it's just a completely different story. Now you've got other players that are going to get into the mix, right? Like Jamar Browder impressed in practice 1. Andrew Marsh, I think we would all imagine, is going to likely be a factor. But at the same time, I've said this time and time again on this show, as much as Sharon said last year, and I think it was fall camp, that the further away you are from the ball, the more likely you are to be able to play early. I tend to find that wide receivers tend to need a year. So, I mean, that might mean Channing Goodwin and Amarian Stewart. Or maybe a healthy Amarian Walker can do something. I don't know. They're at least getting bigger, right? With Jamar Browder. They brought back Amarian Walker, who's 6'3", got Donovan McCulley. They're looking at a bunch of different guys there. But at the same time, it still feels a little dire. Now, having better quarterback play, which we'll talk about here in segment 3, certainly can help that, right? Because, it's not like Davis Warren was entirely inaccurate when he was out there. But at the same time, having a guy who can have a lot better placement can help you out a ton, can make things a lot easier. Putting it where only your receiver can get it, not putting the ball in harm's way and stuff like that. But what they also need is not just guys that can make those catches and make plays. You need guys that can do a little bit of yards after catch. And I don't feel like Michigan necessarily has had a ton of that in the last year. That you got that a bit with Roman Wilson the year before. You didn't really necessarily get that with Cornelius, right? Cornelius, it always felt like he'd make some difficult catches on third downs. That was like, he was like a third down merchant for JJ McCarthy. It's like it's third and 8. He'd get 9 yards and it's like he'd catch it and you'd sit there. I'd be sitting there watching it, through my lens and be like, did he even catch that? I don't even know. And then you watch the replay. It's like, oh, wow, he did it. But yet didn't really get lauded for his ability there. They didn't really have much of anything like that, right? So that's going to be incumbent upon Chip Lindsey. That's going to be incumbent upon just players elevating themselves. It definitely does not feel like a Big Ten wide receiver room. And let's face it, even with how good Cornelius and Roman were, I'm not sure that this has been what most Big Ten wide receiving rooms would look at and say, heck yeah, for several years. I think that they got the most out of those two guys. But when you look at it, it should be easier than it's been for Michigan in a lot of ways. Obviously, the tight ends have really played a big part. I mean, even in 2023, it was Colston Loveland and A.J. Barner on top of those guys. So you would just like to see Michigan just get better at the position than what it's been, because it's been a long time since that Michigan's had a receiver that you're just like, yeah, they really need to go to the air. They got a guy that it's just impossible to cover. We see Michigan play teams that have that, but Michigan hasn't really had that. Now, I think that that's possible, right? Sherrell Moore said yesterday that they're trying to get bigger at the position. They're getting away from that diminutive speed and space style receiver, going for more possession receivers. Maybe that'll be part of it. It's going to be a heck of a lot harder for defensive backs to cover 6'5" guys. And that's where also you'd like to see Amarian Walker take a step forward. And then you can still have, it's like, okay, now they're getting all the attention. Now you can go to your Andrew Marsh at 6 foot. Now you can go to your Amarian Stewart at 5'10". Now you can go to Channing Goodwin at 5'11", right? Like you can start to be able to utilize some of those guys in different ways. I think that would be interesting, because especially like Frederick Moore is like what? Like 6'1". It's not like he's like this towering dude. He's like my height. And so to be able to create more opportunities for him, to create more opportunities for Samaj Morgan, I think that would really work out if you have those bigger receivers. But it's going to come down to the quarterback position. I'm going to tell you some stats, and you're going to just see how much different this is probably going to be this year. And we're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House, whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service so that you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage, and now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. All right, I'm going to tell you some stats about the quarterbacks. We're not using Bryce Underwood's high school. I don't think that's fair, right? They don't play as many games, different competition. But we know that Bryce Underwood is likely a guy that can come in and just play incredibly well. Even if he doesn't necessarily have that ability to do a lot of the things that you hope he could do, I think just what you see from terms of ball placement, accuracy, arm strength, athleticism, all of that, he's just a massive improvement off of what Michigan's had over the course of the last year. No offense to Davis Warren and Alex Orji, who I still like both of them. But what did Davis Warren do as the primary starting quarterback for Michigan, right? Started the first 3 games and then started the last 4 games, 5 games, whatever it was. He threw for 1,199 yards. He had 7 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Not a terrible completion percentage, but obviously you look at that ratio, you look at the yardage, 64%, right? Like there was once upon a time having a plus 60% completion percentage meant that you were in the upper echelon of college quarterbacks. Now it has to be above 70. You can't be below 70. And that's where, okay, guess what? They got a guy coming in that has a plus 70% completion percentage. JJ McCarthy had a plus 70% completion percentage. So here's what's interesting. Looking at, and keep in mind, JJ played more games in 2023 than Mikey Keene did in 2024, but very similar stat lines except for the touchdown interception ratio. JJ had 2,991 yards passing, 22 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, 72% completion percentage. Mikey Keene last year at Fresno State and last year and the year before looked pretty close to identical. He had 2,892. So we're looking at just 100 less yards in less games as well. Actually 99 less yards, 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 71% completion percentage. So while he's made the mistakes, obviously 7 more interceptions last year than JJ had, he's made the mistakes. 2 of the interceptions came against Michigan, right? Well, one of them, both of the plays were plays really well made by Zeke Berry and Will Johnson. You saw that he had that ability. Now, does he have the arm strength that Bryce Underwood or JJ McCarthy have? No. He's not as tall either. That poses some other issues, but you can see that he's gotten around some of that. And then you got Bryce Underwood, who's 6'4", 228. And he's going to come in with the big arm. If he can read defenses and all of that and have a high completion percentage, things are going to go really well. Now, part of that, like I said, is there's all of these things work together, right? The run game is dependent on the offensive line. The pass game is also dependent on the offensive line, and certainly it can be the run game, right? Because you looked at 2023 for Michigan, teams, especially at the beginning of the year, they were like, we're not letting you do what you did in 2022. Where you ran the ball all over everybody all the time. And we felt like we had to sit back in a 2-deep shell just to be able to keep JJ McCarthy from going long on us. Teams were like, we're going to dare JJ McCarthy to pass. And he obliged them. And that's one of those things where I feel like all of these things are interconnected and interrelated, right? If Michigan can run the ball at will, if it is the strength of the team, then that's going to then suddenly that's going to pull in those linebackers and pull in those safeties. And then the middle of the field is going to be a lot more open for the pass game. But if the pass game is just atrocious, then they're just going to be like, you know what, if the pass game is good, then it can back those guys off and then they can still run and whatever. But if it's not that, if the pass game is like it was last year, then teams are just going to be like, yeah, we're just going to bring the house all the time to stop the run. So all of these things are interrelated, and especially because if wide receivers can't make catches, then you've got that problem too. So all of these things are interdependent on one another. That's why I would say one of the strengths I feel should be defensive. I feel like you saw what happened in the last 2 games, and I understand you lose, all those top guys, Mason and Kenneth and Will Johnson, who didn't play for half the year as it was, and Josiah Stewart. Makari Page, who played well at the tail end, Quentin Johnson. But at the same time, Quentin Johnson was the only one that I just mentioned that played in the bowl game, and they held Alabama to 13 points. Alabama was with most of its players, not Justice Haynes, but with most of its players in that bowl game. So it's kind of interesting. And Ohio State, a lot of the players that you're going to see this year played against Ohio State, held them to 10 points. So I feel like defensively is more the strength. I think ESPN's wrong about that. I understand the star power on defense doesn't look as much, right? Like you look and you say like, oh man, you got Justice Haynes, 5-star running back. You got Jordan Marshall, high 4-star that from Ohio of all places. That's got to be really good. They got Bryce Underwood. But at the same time, defensively, it's not like they're slouches up front. Former 5-star in Damon Payne. Rayshon Benny was a high 4-star. Derek Moore was a high 4-star. Ernest Hausman was the top guy in the transfer portal at a time. Jayshawn Barham was one of the top transfer portal guys. Then you look at some of the 3-stars that Michigan has. You've got TJ Guy, who's far exceeded expectations. Rod Moore's far exceeded expectations. Zeke Berry was a 4-star. So like they've got a lot of options defensively. It's just for whatever reason, they don't resonate in the same way that some of the guys Michigan has had, but it doesn't always work out that way. I mean, how often do you look at Iowa's defense and say, yeah, man, they're just loaded with players? Usually it's like it's a 3-star that comes out of nowhere in large part because they understand Phil Parker's system. I think that's kind of where Michigan is as far as that's concerned. Anyway, that's going to do it for us today. We will be back tomorrow. We eventually are going to get to basketball. I don't know if that'll be tomorrow or not. But we will continue as we go on. We'll start looking at Friday's Sweet 16 matchup against Auburn. Hopefully we'll have a crossover with Zach Blackerby from Locked On Auburn, and we'll go from there. But anyway, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.